Hello.
Welcome back to the Space Gulag. Today we'll find out what happened had Jango Fett killed Mace Windu. Before we begin, special thanks to all of our patrons. The next episode of the miniseries comes out this Saturday. Our story begins on the planet Geonosis. A great battle was underway in the Geonosian arena. It was an epic clash between Jedi and between droids. Above, Count Dooku watched as the Jedi fought their hardest against an overwhelming odd. The truth being that the Separatists had overwhelming numbers and the Jedi were outmanned. There were 200 Jedi that showed up to rescue Senator Amidala, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Anakin Skywalker. That number of Jedi was rapidly descending. During the conflict, bounty hunter Jango Fett leapt down into the field of combat to prove a point to his son. While they were standing on the observation deck before the battle, Mace Windu held a lightsaber to Jango's throat. Jango was proving to his son that people just don't threaten men like him. Jango was a renowned bounty hunter who had killed dozens of Jedi during his time, and to teach his son that not even the Jedi should be feared. In his mind, this was a worthwhile investment, though Jango didn't realize he was about to face down one of the premier Jedi in the Jedi Order. Mace Windu wasn't just a master of the Order, he was a masterful duelist and one of the greatest Jedi of this era. Jango landed at the most opportune time, as Windu was knocked off balance by a reek. His lightsaber was on the ground, and it was perfect striking opportunity for Jango. He used his grapple and pulled the lightsaber towards him before Mace could get up or use the Force. Windu started to run forward as a reek started to follow after him. Jango used his jetpack to get out of the way as he watched the Jedi Master leap away from the reek and roll across the ground. Windu got up as two battle droids closed in around him. He used the Force to crush their bodies before turning his attention back to Jango. The bounty hunter used his pistols and shot heavy firepower at the Jedi Master while keeping his distance. Jango was distracted as a Jedi Knight ran up on him and swung. Jango ducked under the lightsaber swing and shot into the Jedi's side before grabbing his footing and blasting through the Jedi's head. Windu was even closer. Jango turned his jetpack on and started shooting. Windu evaded every shot he could as he got closer to Jango, jumping into the air after the bounty hunter. Jango used his jetpack to propel backwards further and further away while he shot at the Jedi Master. Windu was unable to defend himself, and he was clipped in the shoulder and in the stomach as he fell hard to the ground. Jango landed on the ground as the reek sped past him and put its horn into Mace Windu's side and lifted him from the ground, tossing him over his head. Dooku watched on the balcony as Jango kicked Mace in the head before shooting him on the spot, to make sure that he was dead. A couple Jedi noticed this and they made their way over to kill Jango. He was quick on his feet, lowering his jetpack and shooting a rocket at the feet of the Jedi, dispersing them and killing two of them immediately. The last Jedi ran forward and Jango slid under her, throwing his vibro wrist blade across her stomach before jumping up and wrapping his hands around her neck and snapping it. Jango turned his jetpack back on and jumped up to the balcony. When he arrived, he handed Dooku the lightsaber of Master Windu and dismissed himself, telling Dooku that he would be available for more bounties if the price were right. Jango left the arena as the sound of gunships rained down. The Republic was here. Jango told Boba during this period of time that it was oh so important to have strength and resilience, to not allow anyone to bully you or push you around. If someone threatens you, make sure that it's their last decision. Jango and Boba entered Slave 1 and departed from Geonosis. Boba asked where they were going to go, to which Jango told Boba that he had some friends that might be of assistance to them. Inside the arena, the battle slowed down as Dooku called out to the Jedi, demanding that they surrender, but there was no leader amongst the Jedi. Moments into it, two other Jedi had been captured during a raid on a droid control ship, and they were pushed into the circle of captured Jedi. Dooku told the Jedi that if one of them spoke up, then they could certainly save themselves, becoming a bargaining for the Republic and the Separatists. But no one did. It was silence. Dooku shamefully said that it was a travesty as he prepared to lower his hand. The droids all raised their weapons, and the clone gunships flew over the arena blasting away. It was an epic firefight, and the Jedi defended themselves from the droid forces as they waited until their escape vessels landed. The Jedi backpedaled into their vessels as the clone troopers defended their positions. Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Padme hopped onto a vessel, and they were taken away with the rest of the crowd. On their vessel was High Council Master Ki-Adi-Mundi, and so as the battle raged on, the Jedi ordered to land at the first checkpoint. The Great Battle of Geonosis had begun, and the clone troopers were rushing into combat against the Separatist forces. Ki-Adi-Mundi had the vessel land and ordered the pilot to take the Senator back to the forward command post, where Master Yoda would be. Padme was extremely pissed off, but Mundi wouldn't have a Senator die on this battlefield. Mundi told the other two Jedi standing next to him, including Skywalker and Kenobi, to mount up and get with a squad of clone troopers to charge the Separatists. This battle would be long and hard fought. It was up to the Republic to be victorious, and after hours of vicious combat, the Republic would reach into Geonosis and drive the droid forces from the planet. The galaxy would enter the Clone Wars, and after the victory, there would be much change within the Jedi Order. With the death of nearly 200 members and the loss of the Master of the Order, it was time for a Jedi to fill that role, and become the new Master of the Order. That Jedi Master was Master Ki-Adi-Mundi. He was a selection out of the few other council members, but with the most vocal voice, he won the selection, and became the seat right next to Master Yoda. As for Anakin Skywalker, he would become a Jedi Knight, and Obi-Wan would move on from teaching Skywalker to become a member of the Jedi High Council, alongside some other new members of the Council such as Shaak Ti and Kit Fisto. The Jedi, though, immediately were thrust into a power position, taking the role of generals in this war against the Separatists. Out in the Outer Rim, the most renowned bounty hunter in the galaxy, Jango Fett, found residence. He got himself a nice place to stay on the planet of Taurus, though this didn't mean that his role as a bounty hunter came to an end. It simply meant he had a place of residence away from the main war. Jango didn't want to get involved in the war. He had a responsibility to his son, and that was very important to him. The bounty he made off the clone army was considerable, and he could probably live the rest of his life pretty much freely if he wanted to. But Jango wasn't exactly someone who could sit still. He also knew that it was a lot more likely that the Separatists would hire him for bounties, but he wanted to avoid that line of work. Killing off a Jedi was already a bad idea, let alone killing off a general who served the Grand Army of the Republic, which Mace Windu technically was when he died. Being on Taurus allowed Boba and Jango to have a safe space to operate, but just because it was in the Outer Rim didn't mean it was cheap. Taurus was one of the few upper-class planets in the Outer Rim, and for someone like Jango, it was simply better to be here than, say, for example, Ryloth, where the Separatists had no issue of invading and destroying. Jango may have been a simple man making his way through the galaxy, but the galaxy he existed in was far from simple. And Jango wasn't just as simple as he called himself. He was a very smart man, and he knew where to pick up his fights and where to start them. For someone like Boba Fett, it was very efficient having a father to be his guide. If he lost his father, he would likely be drifting around space on Slave 1 looking for help. Jango taught his son valuable lessons during their time together here on Taurus, and even helped work on his son's quick draw. Jango, being the greatest bounty hunter in the galaxy at the time, knew there was always a target on his back. He'd killed Jedi, politicians, monarchs, patriarchs during his time as a bounty hunter. He believed he needed to be at the top of his game. Currently, there is only one other bounty hunter who even had a close quick draw to Jango, and that was Cad Bane. But Jango and Cad were relatively close, though it wouldn't stop Jango or Cad from trying to kill each other for the bright price. Most people who hired bounty hunters knew how close the two of them were, and decided that if they wanted a bounty hunter killed, then they would just hire a group of others, lowlife who were hungry for some reputation. None of them would ever stand a chance against Cad or Jango, but it was worthwhile for the two bounty hunters to have target practice. The galaxy was kill or be killed, and that was a lesson that Jango consistently reaffirmed with his son. That while he could grow into a powerful bounty hunter or even follow in his own journey, the galaxy would always take from him if he allowed it to do so. So, at that, it was very important to be at the top of your game when out in the galaxy. Boba, with his father's guidance, would get progressively better at his quickshot, until Jango was sent to the planet of Ren Var to pick up a Sith artifact for Lord Tyrannus. This was done behind Siddi's back, because Dooku wanted to have his artifact without Palpatine knowing he was retrieving it, which is why Jango was the perfect subject, considering Jango was already on Dooku's payroll. It was an easy retrieval mission until Jango got ambushed by a bunch of Ren Var local inhabitants, carnivorous beings that spent most of their time huddled up in the caves hibernating. And what Jango was looking for happened to be in one of those caves, because it's where the Sith built their lair for whatever reason. Jango's retrieval after dealing with the animals went very smooth and successfully. Across the galaxy on Coruscant, the Jedi were being levied forward by a psycho, Ki-Adi-Mundi, who was leading the Jedi on all their endeavors, and while part of it was positive, there were also a lot of negatives that not even Mace Windu would have done. But considering it was the first galactic war anyone alive in the Order had ever really been through, they allowed Mundi to take numerous mistakes. Did this make Ki-Adi-Mundi a bad tactician? No, but it did make him rather senile in a way. Master Mundi was a living embodiment of everything wrong about the Jedi Order. He was much like Luminara, who held values that too badly represented the fallacy of the Jedi Order, and electing him to become the Master of the Order likely had sealed the fate of the Jedi Order. Though Mundi wasn't exactly fond of the politicization of the galaxy, and the efforts of the Chancellor to incorporate every given group of neutral systems into the war effort. It's possible that Mundi could be the saving grace of the Jedi Order too. It was just very undecided at this point. The Jedi were adjusting, and Palpatine was preparing for his grand plan to see the end of the Jedi and of the Republic. The war was off to a brilliant start. The Clone Wars were brutal, and they claimed millions of lives within the first year of combat. During this time, the Jedi adjusted, and Jango and his son avoided the war. Being on Taris gave a certain level of immunity. It kept them out of the war effort and allowed Jango to make noticeable conclusion about everything. Because Jango wasn't in on the whole plan of the clone army from the beginning, he only saw the price of war as it was now. Yes, Jango was a hardened bounty hunter, but as a man with a son, there was a valuable lesson to learn here, such as a lesson to never take a job without knowing all the details, and never doing a job that made you question your own morality, because watching what the Clone Wars did not just to the clones, but to the innocent people of the galaxy was utterly disturbing. Jango was not new to this type of combat. He was very aware of what war could do to people, and he was very knowledgeable about the pain that it could very easily cause. Jango's parents were murdered, and it was how he eventually became a Mandalorian foundling. He also fought during the Mandalorian Civil Wars, before becoming a bounty hunter. But the Mandalorian Civil Wars were nothing in comparison to the utter lack of humanity in the galaxy during the Clone War. Jango had a lot of regret over the creation of the clone army. He may have been a bounty hunter, but he was still a man, and knowing how much pain his clones were causing burdened him. Jango made a vow to himself that he would never work for Tyrannus again, because it was very obvious that Tyrannus didn't like informing him of all the necessary details. To Jango, that was a very incredibly important information. He was a man of honor and of a code that he learned and valued since he was a Mandalorian foundling. He couldn't just forego his own code of ethics. It would defy his mere existence as a Mandalorian, let alone a man. Jango taught these lessons that he learned here to his son. No matter the cost of the work, make sure it aligns with your beliefs, because chasing the golden credit wouldn't always relieve you, because sometimes it could just deceive and corrupt you. Boba took to heart all of what his father told him. Jango was overall a really good dad, and he made a significant impact on Boba. When on Taris, Boba would learn how to pilot Slave 1 better. As Jango put it, the ship had a very specific functioning to it. It's why he chose it. It was much better than any old starfighter or even gunship. Slave 1 was bulky, but it was perfect for bounty hunting. It specialized anything and everything. Boba knew this, and he learned everything he needed to learn about the vessel. On Coruscant, the galaxy was on a trajectory towards the fall of the Republic. The Clone Wars had a burdensome effect on the people of the galaxy. The Master of the Order, Ki-Adi-Mundi, believed that it was time for them to distance themselves from the Republic. Mundi suggested that the Jedi make sure the Republic doesn't force their way onto Mandalore. He had the right idea in mind, because it wasn't a safe decision to start placing clones out on the planets of Mandalore when the war wasn't even out there. Mundi understood that Separatists would use Mandalore as a target if it joined the Republic, because most of its surrounding systems in that quadrant of the galaxy were Separatist. When Mandalore was able to resist the Republic, Mundi told Master Yoda that it were time for the Jedi to distance themselves from the Galactic Republic and the Galactic Senate. The public on Mandalore reacted positively to the Duchess distancing herself from the Republic and claiming neutrality, and so Mundi's hypothesis was that in doing so would have the same effect on the Jedi for the general public of the Republic. Remember, Mundi, no matter how much of a sociopath he was a Jedi purist. What mattered to him most were the Jedi, and so logically, separating the Jedi Order from the Republic sounded like a safe decision. Though in the middle of a war it would prove to be a difficult task. The reason Mundi so brilliantly picked up on this was because he was a strategist, and when he wasn't on the front lines, he was looking into the public opinion on the Jedi. Mundi's main goal was to separate the Jedi from the Senate, and to have the Jedi become as much as a middleman as they were generals before the end of the war. It would make it possible for the Jedi to travel to planets in Separatist territory as well as neutral territory without representing the Republic. Though one downside would be, the Jedi would be forfeiting their power in the Grand Army of the Republic, and so in the second year of combat, the Jedi made a stance to the Republic. As the Clone Wars started to shift in favor of the Galactic Republic, the Jedi made their move to distance themselves from the Senate, informing the Senate that they would no longer serve the mandate of the Republic. It was their mandate to serve the people of the galaxy. As Jedi, they would be renouncing their control over the grand armies of the Republic and acting peacefully as a neutral force in the galaxy. The Jedi served alongside the Republic because of genosis, and afterwards they served on behalf of the Republic because they believed they were serving a justifiable cause. But now it was obvious that the galaxy needed the Jedi to be neutral more than it needed them to be generals and heroes. With this motion, a whole lot of respect fled towards the Jedi Order. Of course, many Republic loyalists saw this as treachery, but even many of the die-hard Republic loyalists could see that the Jedi were trying to end the war, not perpetuate its length. This would send the Republic into a tailspin, and even more than that, it would throw Palpatine for a loop. But even he knew how to deal with the Jedi. It was just a matter of leverage. because now that the Jedi were working on peace, it would only be a matter of time until his plans were foiled, because this now meant that the Jedi had free access to travel to Sereno if they wanted to hunt and defeat Dooku and capture him. Luckily, that wasn't even on the plate for the Jedi, though it didn't stop Sidious from basically panicking about this inconvenience to his plans. It wasn't much of a panic, but it was a preparation for a possible failure. On the other side of the galaxy, there was a coup on Mandalore, and now Bo-Katan was reaping the pain of her actions. She helped a revolution dethrone her sister, just for it to be uprooted by the sole, true leader of the revolution. Her sister's death would plunge Mandalore into an unforeseen era of darkness. Bo-Katan told Obi-Wan to get help from the Republic, and so, when he left Mandalore after seeing the planet plunge into darkness, he would realize that something changed. Obi-Wan knew there was nothing that the Jedi could do, considering technically, he wasn't even supposed to be on Mandalore at the moment, though upon returning to Coruscant, Obi-Wan would learn that the Jedi had left the Republic during his mission to Mandalore, so it was completely possible for the Jedi to aid, but they wouldn't. When Kenobi brought it up to the Council told him that their first responsibility was to the galaxy. Mandalore could wait. At the moment, they were trying to make sure that the galaxy didn't destroy itself. Jango Fett, who had been hidden on Taris for the past 2 years with his son, learned of the fall into war of his beloved Mandalore. Another civil war was beginning, and this time, the war was over who had control of the Darksaber. Jango heard this out of rumors circulating out of Mandalore, and so Jango told his son that he would return once he won what was truthfully his, making sure Boba knew that he should stay here on Taris. Jango Fett got up and departed from Mandalore. Jango flew save one across the galaxy towards a war-filled planet. The warring factions of the Mandalorians, ironically, were formerly all on the same side. They had originally tried to overthrow the Duchess of Mandalore, and yet they turned on each other the moment she was gone. The era of peace that had existed for 20 years immediately vanished, and terror broke out. Jango knew it would be a terrible idea to approach the capital city of Sundari, so when he reached Mandalore, he parked Slave 1 near a system of caves. He landed outside, far outside of Sundari, and he could see smoke emanating from the city. Jango at this point didn't realize that there was a Force user inside the Mandalorian throne room. His natural assumption was that either House Vizsla or House Wren took control of the throne, likely House Vizsla, which Jango looked forward in the leisure of killing him. Jango never cared for the House, and he saw them as a fatal detriment to the rest of Mandalore. He also saw House Kryze in the same way. That went for both sisters, the peace lover and the warrior follower. Jango used the cover at night to make his way towards the capital city. There was still the sound of blaster fire when Jango got to the platform. He then saw a vessel land, and out from the vessel came a cloaked figure. Jango didn't know who it was, but there was a menacing essence coming from the presence before him. He watched as the cloaked figure lifted 2 men off the ground and then choked them to death as he got onto a speeder and shot across the planet. Jango Fett kept a close eye on him as he followed him to the location. He kept a safe distance, and then he heard yelling as the sound of lightsabers igniting caught Jango's attention. It must have been Jedi, but he'd never seen Jedi use those kind of powers. When he peeked through the door, he saw red lightsabers clashing and swinging. It was a monstrous duel. Jango didn't care about the duel. The red Zabrak had the Darksaber, and that simply was something that couldn't belong to a non-Mandalorian. But even Jango knew how to pick his fights. He couldn't fight these individuals. It wasn't within his cards. He needed to wait until it was an opportune time to strike. The duel carried out into the courtyard. Maul, Savage, and Sidious used their strength against each other. The duel was incredible. Jango then got into position, and then the larger one fell. Jango knew an opportunity when he saw one. The robed man sheathed his blades of death as he told the other two that there could only be two, a master and apprentice. Jango jumped down from the window, free-falling. He then used his grapple and shot out, capturing the Darksaber, and then once the saber was in his grip, he flew away. Sidious looked at the Mandalorian start to fly away. He couldn't care less. Maul reached out with the Force trying to stop the Mandalorian bounty hunter, but his back was then covered in lightning. Sidious cackled, and then Maul whipped around, igniting his lightsaber and Savage's to try and hold his own against his former master. Jango, on the other hand, would be traced by Mandalorians to the docks, where he would stop and find himself surrounded by Gar Saxon and Maul's loyalists. When they demanded to know who he was, Jango told them to kneel, igniting the Darksaber and wielding it before them. Mandalorians looked at each other. Jango told the Mandalorians that they would unite under him or perish as traitors. Gar Saxon was the first to speak, telling Jango that only the Night Owls, led by Bo-Katan, had betrayed the throne. Jango tilted his head down and told the Mandalorians that they would hunt her down and end the Night Owls, and whoever else didn't bow down to the rightful ruler of Mandalore. Jango referred to himself as a new Mandalore, the first one seen in centuries. Sure, Pre Vizsla referred to himself as a Mandalore, but the truth is, he wasn't. His rule was overthrown in less than 24 hours. No real leader of Mandalore would fall so fast. Jango reminded the Mandalorians that those only worthy would serve under him. All others would be killed. Jango told the Mandalorians that when he returned, he expected his throne to be adequately prepared for him. When Gar Saxon asked where he was going, Jango told him that he was going to fetch his son from Taurus. Saxon bowed, rather begrudgingly, as he turned around and started issuing out orders to find and hunt down the rest of the Night Owls. Jango made his way back to Slave 1 and then returned to Taurus to retrieve his son. On the planet of Raxus, a significant change was being made. Thanks to the efforts of the Jedi Order, as the Jedi moved away from the active role of being generals, they naturally defected into what they had been doing forever. There were two major investments for the Jedi at the moment, the largest one being the negotiation of peace treaty on the Raxus, being that the Jedi were both on Coruscant and Raxus during the creation of this treaty. The second one was the Zygerians. During the second year of combat, Anakin Skywalker, Kenobi, and Ahsoka had a momentary trip to the Zygerian Empire home world, where they found that it had restarted their criminal empire on the backs of slavery. And so the three Jedi, accompanied by other Jedi Masters, were taken to the Zygerians to remove them from any sort of imperial power and take away their slaves. With the walls closing in on Palpatine, he made an executive decision that would completely restructure his war effort. Palpatine's plan was to put into action, and within days, the Separatists would invade Coruscant. They would jump down the throats of the Republic, just as the Republic was finding victory in the Mid and Outer Rim. The Separatists were able to sneak through the Republic lines and smash into Coruscant's defense system through a secret hyperspace lane supplied to them by the mastermind of the entire plan. The Republic had no knowledge of it at all, and while the Jedi were present on Coruscant, Palpatine had a plan to get rid of the Jedi, that is, by wiping them out immediately. And so the Separatists quickly bounced through the Republic defense lines, crushing their defense fleet, and as per orders of Dooku, the ships flew down through the atmosphere and waged war on the city of Coruscant, knocking down skyscrapers and taking aim at the Jedi Temple. But see, here's one thing. Dooku knew that his time would come to an end with Palpatine, and he wanted to take advantage of it. He was going to wipe out the Galactic Senate, destroy his master, defeat the Jedi, and take over control of the plan for himself. It was a simple switching of power for Dooku, and so when the Separatist battleships neared the Senate building, Palpatine's assurance in his perfect plan immediately diminished. And when the Hyena bombers flew above, that came to the end of the Sith Lord. Sidious was killed, but not just him, the majority of the senators, most of which were present. The several Jedi Masters trying to orchestrate the peace treaty from Coruscant were killed too. The bombers then made their way to the Jedi Temple. The Jedi actually reacted to this with hostility, because the Separatists had crossed the line and broke the peace treaty that was being created, and the Jedi wouldn't stand for a massacre of innocent civilians. But Dooku was not stopping. Hyena bombers covered the city in smoke, toppling buildings over, and as they reached the Jedi Temple, the Jedi inside were rocked with a terrible shaking. The temple was a fortress, but it wouldn't hold forever, as a Providence-class destroyer got into range and opened fire. Dooku watched as his former home crumbled to the ground. The few Jedi who were able to escape the destruction fought their hardest to defend Coruscant, but there was nothing they could do. They were limited by clone reinforcements, and the fleets of the Republic were currently traveling through hyperspace. It was at this moment Dooku pulled back. He knew the Republic would return, and it would be better to jump the gun and hide away. Without the Republic government operational, the Jedi or the Senate, the Separatists were the ruling class in the galaxy. They were the only galactic-sized organization, though they themselves were not overly fond of Dooku's actions. With the Jedi present on Raxus, the Jedi pleaded that they reprimand Dooku as a terrorist and have him captured, and while the Separatists were at odds with the Republic, what Dooku did was too far. In the short hour he was on Coruscant, he costed billions of credits and damages, and worse than that, the lives of nearly 100 million civilians, 10,000 of which being Jedi, and over 2,000 of which being senators. It was an absolute genocide, and even the CIS wouldn't stand for it. What Dooku did was egregious, but it was all part of a plan. Once Dooku's fleet returned from Coruscant, he took his wealth and vanished away. Dooku wasn't doing this on behalf of anyone but the galaxy. The death of the Jedi and the Sith were meant to allow the galaxy to heal, while the destruction of the Galactic Republic was in favor of allowing the Separatist Council an easy opportunity to make amends with the galaxy. And while he believed his actions were justified, they were far from. The actions he made cost so much in the means of peace, and the Republic worlds from the core to the mid-rim were preparing to elongate this war. Even if they didn't have the proper funds to continue a long-standing war with the Separatists, they were going to anyways. What the Separatists did at Coruscant was unforgivable. It was an unprovoked attack during the signing of a peace treaty. Some may call what they did a war crime, but that's what it was. And while the Separatists tried to say that they weren't in favor of it, it just made them look worse. Along the few survivors of the Jedi Order who were present on Raxus, it made them look like traitors. The Republic then outlawed the Jedi, and without executing Order 66, made it illegal for the Jedi to be in Republic territory. They all had 3 planetary rotations to leave the Republic, and if they didn't, they would be hunted, captured, and tried for crimes against the Galactic Republic. The destruction of Coruscant only ignited a fire within the galaxy, especially the Republic, because shortly after, a number of militia members increased tenfold, and it would be an additional complement to the clone trooper. With each individual clone trooper being worth 5 to 10 battle droids, the militia would add to their numbers, by each militia member being worth 2 to 6 battle droids. A massive difference between the clones and the militiamen, but for the Republic, every little bit helped. On Mandalore, Boba and Jango arrived. Jango was telling his son about everything that would likely happen, but first it was time to make sure Boba had some Mandalorian armor. There was a Mandalorian armorer on Concordia, and they would go there before ever arriving at Mandalore. The armorer made Boba a battle suit, made with the best Beskar on the planet. The colors of Boba's outfit were painted green and yellow, per request of the young Fett. Jango told his son that he'd be thrown into war. There would be many challengers that wanted Jango killed, and his son needed to be ready if Jango fell. Jango told Boba that he had been prepared for this moment his entire life, and when they landed on Mandalore, it was still in chaos, though it could be worse. Jango's supporters ran out of the city and defended him as he made his way in with his son. When they got into the palace, Jango was updated on the war effort. Jango sat on the throne and demanded to know where the Night Owls were. Boba watched his father naturally slide into the role of leader, though Jango wasn't going to be as patient as Pre Vizsla was. It's what cost Vizsla his throne, and Jango knew that Gar Saxon would likely be a challenger to him at some point, so in order to obtain complete and total loyalty, he studied the known map of the Night Owl locations. The Night Owls were just outside the city, and he was going to make short work of them. Of course, the Night Owls weren't in the open, rather a defendable location, and Jango knew this. And so he called together the top warriors he had at his disposal and began to construct a plan. Hours later, the Mandalorians would leap into action. Slave 1 would lead the charge, and the pilot of the massive vessel would be no other than Boba Fett. His father, on the other hand, waited at the edge of the bay. The Mandalorians flew forward, and as soon as they got to the Night Owl camp, Boba whipped Slave 1 around, and then began to unleash blaster fire. Jango stood at the edge of the vessel as Boba tilted his ship up and dropped a sonic bomb out of the back. The bomb exploded, and Jango jumped from the ship, and his warriors followed him down to the surface. The Night Owls were completely discombobulated. For those that survived the sonic boom, they were either blind or deafened. Those that weren't deafened or blinded were immediately thrown in battle. The Jango Mandalorians dropped down into their camp and began to open fire. It was a tight corridor battle, but there was no escaping. Jango took the lead mantle, using the darksaber and his pistol to cut through these traitors. As he was doing this, Bo-Katan rose from the rubble of her makeshift home. She ignited her shield on her wrist and shot at Jango. Fett turned around and moved out of the way, pointing his darksaber forward so that Gar Saxon and the rest of the Mandalorians would finish off the Night Owls. Jango was going to take on Bo-Katan. She was quite the warrior, leaping out from behind the rubble and getting into a fistfight with Jango. Fett was wise enough to sheath the darksaber because as a child he was exceptionally skilled in unarmed combat, and there was no difference here. Jango specialized in this, and he got to work throwing punches, dodging others, and tanking the rest. Jango very easily outmatched Bo-Katan because of his early beginnings on Conquered Dawn. In the middle of the fist fight, Jango whipped out the darksaber and cut off Bo-Katan's hands and kicked her to the ground. Before ever giving her a chance to speak, he dragged his blade across her neck. But before Jango could rejoice in the fall of House Kryze, he was thrown from his feet by a massive blaster bolt that came from Gar Saxon. Jango had to handle this fight differently, because Gar Saxon was a much larger man than him. He had a range that Jango just simply didn't have. But Jango had a couple of advantages in his fighting style. He got back up and raised his fists as Gar Saxon lifted his fists and threw them heavily into Jango, throwing him from his feet again. Gar walked up and kicked at Jango in the ribs, shattering one of them. Jango looked up and saw his son coming down. Gar Saxon reached down and grabbed Jango by the neck, lifting him up and throwing him. Jango slammed down and then looked over at Gar, who raised his pistols and began to fire. Jango grabbed the darksaber and used it to cut off Bo-Katan's arm so that he could turn the shield on. He blocked the shots coming from Gar Saxon, and then Jango got to his feet, throwing her discarded arm at him as he ignited the darksaber and smacked it against his wrists. Gar Saxon stood tall over Jango and removed one of his wrists and punched down on Jango's face. Jango tumbled back and turned back around, opening up his blades on his wrist and slashing at Gar Saxon, moving delicately and moving in the Gar Saxon's range. Jango knew this was a battle of range. In the tight fight with someone who was much larger, Jango needed to be close. Jango threw the Darksaber into the side of Gar Saxon. The hit was enough to jar Saxon from his footing, though luckily for Saxon, he had reinforced sides of his armor. Jango sheathed the Darksaber and leapt forward, punching down on Gar Saxon's helmet, and then using his hand-to-hand skills to get himself around Gar Saxon's neck. Jango grabbed his own wrist and pulled it tighter around Gar Saxon's neck, as the large man got off the ground and jumped up and back down on his back, putting all of his weight on the Jango. The sounds of bones breaking was audible to the two men and the group of onlookers, waiting to see who would become their new leader. Jango saw that his Darksaber slipped off of his belt, so his best option was to remove Gar Saxon's helmet, and headbutting the helmetless Gar Saxon. Jango used his grapple to get a hold of the Darksaber as he used it to jab in the Saxon's head, killing him instantly. Jango would turn around and hoist the Darksaber above his head, and then the Mandalorians around would kneel before their new leader. Jango would retain the title of the first true Mandalore in centuries on Mandalore. As for in the rest of the galaxy, the few surviving members of the Jedi Order would go into hiding. These included Shaak Ti, Ahsoka Tano, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Quinlan Vos, Depa Billaba, and Anakin Skywalker. Though Anakin was livid, and he was hell-bent on finding Dooku, considering the attack on Coruscant claimed the lives of Padme Amidala. Anakin was furious, though through his anger he would never find Dooku and get his revenge. Maul, who was able to escape the custody of the Sith, would go into hiding as well, seeing as Mandalore was no longer under his possible control with the rise of Clan Fett. As for the galaxy, a war would continue for 5 more years. The clones who came off the assembly lines at Kamino were essentially cannon fodder. They were to serve and to die, which most of them ended up doing. The Separatists tried for peace 32 more times since the Battle of Coruscant, but the Republic wouldn't accept it at all, and so it would result in the complete and utter destruction of the Republic, Grand Army of the Republic, and the last remnants of the Republic Senate, who originally survived the Battle of Coruscant. Though the Separatists wouldn't do a terrible job, and before Dooku died, he would see the positive impact of his terrible actions. The CIS Council was more empathetic than the Republic, and the capital of the galaxy was moved to Raxus. Because of that, the Separatists, now considered the Galactic Confederacy, would rid the galaxy of crime lords and take care of planets that had been devastated by the war, turning the battle droids into medical and carrying droids, a simple reprogramming that changed the entire dynamic in the galaxy, a galaxy balanced without the influence of the Jedi or the Sith. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks to Benjamin Wells, Tiger Boy, Darth Revan, Pimp Daddy Bane, Darth Cheesy, Apollo, Madman Studios, Anakin 003, Lemon Knight, Flynn Van Cease, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Hit 2,000 likes on this video. I don't know what's coming next, but it is. The next part of the miniseries is on Saturday. Otherwise, let's talk about our story. So this is a little bit different. For those of you guys that know me, I am a big Plo Koon fan. But I decided that I wanted to go with Master Mundi because I thought that'd be interesting. Now, I kind of took a different approach than I think anyone would expect me to take with Mundi, and I thought that'd be fun. Like taking a different approach with Mundi. He's typically disliked. He's a typically disliked Jedi, but I wanted to make it make sense for him to be the way he is, which he is the way he is because he's a Jedi purist, and I see that as like him possibly going away from the Senate. And the reason I say that is because during the Mandalore arc, I think season 2 of the Clone Wars, he talks about not wanting Satine to join the Republic because it's only going to be bad for the Republic or for people of Mandalore, and so that kind of makes me feel like he doesn't have total reliance in the Republic, and so after 2 years of battle, he might decide, actually, what if we didn't serve the Republic and served the people of the galaxy? And so that's quite possible, quite possible, yeah, quite possible. But, you know, I thought it would be fun to change up the Master of the Order, because, you know, for those of you that know me, you guys know that I like Plo Koon, and that would be the obvious choice, but I'm not going to choose the obvious choice, of course. As for Jango, I had fun with Jango's story, because the last time we did a story about Jango, he was more in his element. He was more being a bounty hunter, but here he's more of a father, and so I wanted to approach him being a father a little bit more. Obviously, as a father, we know that he was a bounty hunter still, and he still did his thing, but as the war began, you know, I wanted to kind of explore the element a little bit of him being an actual man, because you have to remember, I mean, he's a hardened bounty hunter. He's like the best, most renowned bounty hunter in the galaxy, but also I wanted to explore his masculinity as a father, because I think that's very important in the context of the story. You know, is he going to choose being a bounty hunter for a man like Tyrannus, who obviously lied to him, or is he going to choose to, you know, be a father and kind of hide away from the war because the war isn't where he or his son need to be? And so I wanted to challenge that and see and take the direction I took. obviously making Jango the new Mandalore was a lot of fun, and having him fight Bo-Katan and beat Gar Saxon was a lot of fun as well. So I hope you all enjoyed that, keeping up consistently with the Mandalorian stories in succession with, well, the Mandalorian. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed this video. This video was a lot of fun to do. Anyways, I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.